Hello everyone, how are you going? Welcome to High School in America versus Canada, something that I would have thought is just identical between the two countries, and I don't know mounds about each systems, but it'll be interesting to hear how they differ.
What's good guys, I'm Shandi, and today I'm going to be talking about the differences between Canadian high schools versus American high schools. I live in Canada and I used to think that American and Canadian high schools were really similar until I went on a trip to Florida and actually talked to some high schoolers and realized that Canadian high schools and American high schools are actually really different. So I've compiled a list and split them into 4 categories, which are grades/marks, whatever you want to call it, extracurriculars/events, structures, and others. And also disclaimer, I live in Ontario in the Toronto region, so some things that I say on behalf of Canada may not be the case for all of Canada, and same thing goes for the US as well. Obviously, I don't live there, so I'm not sure if some of the things on my list would apply to most of the US or just some of the US. These are just things that I've heard from other Americans and things that I've heard online.
Well, like always, funnily enough, one person can only provide one perspective, and even though you can just go out and hear all of these other people's experiences and going, oh, I hate school, oh, I love school, and everything in between, like she said, it is going to vary so much, and I can only imagine that the USA probably varies a bit more just based on their state laws and all those things, where I can only imagine Canada probably has a more holistic nationwide program.
So the category that I'm going to start with is grades and marks. This one really surprised me. So number 1 is that in the United States, A's start at 90%, whereas in Canada, A's start at 80%. So in the US, a 90 would be an A minus, an 80 would be a B minus, a 70 would be a C minus. Whereas in Canada, an 80 is an A minus, a 70 is a B minus, a 60 is a C minus, and so on. When I found this out, I was in Florida at a conference and the speaker told the crowd to shout out what percentage A started at. And while everyone else shouted 90, me and the other Canadians shouted 80%. And I was like, huh?
She really has got me questioning what the Australian school system uses. I mean, I guess I should say New South Wales because I don't know what Perth's doing, or Tassie, do they even go to school? However, thinking about it, I guess if it took a fairly standard total assessment mark of about 20 to 25, let's just call it 20, that's a bit easier. I think an A is generally 17, 18, 19, 20. No, 18, 19, 20? Oh, I don't know. I guess it does depend as well. I mean, I guess if nothing else, it is definitely a way to make people feel better about themselves to go, oh, I got a 79, I'll round it up to an 80, and then I'll tell everyone I got an A. It doesn't matter where it could be. That can be 80 to 99 or 100. It's perfect.
So number 2 is that when applying to post-secondary schools in the US, they look at your GPA, which is calculated using grades that you've gotten throughout high school, whereas in Canada, they use percent averages, which are calculated only using grade 12 and sometimes grade 11 marks. And GPAs just sound so stressful because you have to consistently get good grades all throughout high school, whereas here in Ontario, universities only look at your top 6 marks, which includes any prerequisite courses that are required for the program that you're applying to. So most people's averages to apply to university would comprise of 6 of their grade 12 marks, and sometimes grade 11 if you're applying for early acceptances or whatever other reason.
It took a moment for my brain to kick in and just be able to recognize all the different acronyms that she was talking about. Honestly, not even recognize them, but at least just be able to put them in their own categories. But I have heard of GPAs before, but I never knew that it was just based off your entire schooling career, being your entire high schooling career. That sounds extreme and doesn't really favor anyone that just glows up and just does way better as they get older because they have a change of heart towards school. I mean, I'm just basing that on what she just said, but I feel as though Australia included, there are a lot of people that, like I said, just knuckle down. They, at the end of their schooling careers, they finally actually figured out kind of the direction they want to go, maybe not the job they want to do, but the direction they want to go. They are able to choose the subjects that they want to do, and then they do well in them instead of just completely just hating school every day from year 7 to 9, 10. And so even though I still have no idea about how a GPA is calculated, or at least just even how it scales, like I feel as though I hear such low numbers in terms of 3.9, 3.7, and that's alright or good, I don't know. I also don't really know what she means by percent averages, and so I'm just gonna have to look it up. Oh, interesting. All 10 provinces of Canada have a special grading system, and each of them assigns its own system, so it's not more of a federal thing. I guess I'll have to revoke that sentence. But then it says, what is a 4.0 GPA in Canada? I guess that explains why I'm hearing 3.7s and 3.9s, because I think 4 is the highest. In most cases, a high GPA is somewhere between 3.5 and 4, and a low GPA is somewhere between 1.5 and 2. Okay, well, I'm sure that this is a massive rabbit hole that I could go down, and at least now I know what's kind of a high and what's a low one, but I still don't know how the entire thing comes together, and I still can't believe that just the entire schooling career.
Number 3 is that in the US, standardized tests are done a lot more frequently and are taken a lot more seriously. So in the US, high school kids take the SATs, which post-secondary schools look at, whereas in Canada, there aren't any standardized tests that actually matter. In Ontario, there's something called the EQAO, which is a standardized test that you would take in grade 3, grade 6, and grade 9. But it's not to measure the success of every individual student, it's to make sure that the education system actually works and that kids are learning what they should be learning.
Yes. Honestly, the more that she talks, the more I'm just bewildered by the fact that every country apparently has the same thing, but just use a different name for it. I don't get it. Why does everyone have to be different? Just use the same name, so at least internationally, even people coming from different schools, let alone people just trying to understand the system, can understand what you're talking about, because it's the same thing. As everything that she just said in terms of standardized testing being more for the education system than anything is also conducted within Australia, and people just take it as a joke. There's actually been a whole bunch of controversy over the history of it, but like she said, it is taken every 2 years in year 3, 5, 7, and 9. Yeah, that would make sense. So 4 years just to try and keep the education system just going where it needs to go. And well, to be honest, it hasn't been doing a great job of that. I'm fairly sure that NAPLAN results is what it's called. NAPLAN results have been falling. However, on the other hand, it was interesting to hear that the SATs aren't just something that is taken seriously or at all towards the end of the schooling career. I would have thought it was just kind of like a year 11, 12 kind of thing. But no, according to what she said, it is something that is taken seriously throughout all of their schooling years, and that, I guess, grades people, and I don't know what they would do with all that information. Perhaps it is actually used to build the GPA. That would make a lot of sense, because if you do have a well-established, just standardized test throughout the entire of high school, then you have enough data to be able to build a GPA like that. You just have to hope that people actually care about it, because like I said before, a lot of people in year 7 to later on don't really know what they're doing and don't really care for it.
So the next category is extracurriculars and events. So the first thing is that there's no homecoming dance in Canada. And for the longest time when watching like homecoming in movies and TV shows, I thought that homecoming was part of prom. And I didn't find out that HOCO happens at the beginning of the school year until I started getting a bunch of HOCO vlogs in my recommendations like sometime at the beginning of the school year. And so we don't have anything like the homecoming king and queen either. I feel like this would change from region to region, but my high school calls it semi-formal, and I've heard of other high schools that call it winter formal, and that happens in either November or December. Also, in the US, it seems like people really take HOCO seriously. Like, people be wearing whole prom dresses, like formal ass dresses to HOCO. Whereas in Canada, for semi-formal or winter formal, it's like really casual dresses, nothing too fancy.
Honestly, I feel as though the further I dive into this video, the more my brain just gets blown off, because I had no idea. First of all, I had to get my brain into gear of school starting in, I guess, the middle of the year, and so then you're just going into winter over in November. It's just such a different thing for me. But in saying that, it makes no sense to me how you can have a homecoming king and queen if you just started the year. Surely that, like, how do you have anything to assess on? That doesn't make any sense. And now I'm also wondering, then, is prom at the end of the year? Is prom in the middle of the year? Is it in, I guess it would be summer in July or something like that? Or I have no idea, because I feel as though I have seen a lot of proms that have also been in kind of wintry environments. I mean, actually, in saying that, maybe that is why Canada does not have a homecoming in winter, because, well, a lot of people are going to be freezing if they're just out and about in any kind of a dress or basically anything but a puffer jacket and full snow pants in the middle of winter in November. No thanks, not in Canada, no way.
And the last thing for extracurriculars and events is that in the US, cheerleading and football seem like such a big deal, whereas in Canada, it's like literally the complete opposite. I don't even think that most schools have a cheerleading squad, and if they do, I don't think Canada really has like cheerleading competitions. And football isn't really a big deal either. I think schools take it as seriously as any other sport. And in my high school, we don't even have a guys football team. I would watch movies and TV shows and think that those massive football stadiums are just a TV thing, but I realized that they're not just a TV thing, and a lot of high schools actually have like those massive football stadiums. But that's actually really cool. I wish my school did huge sporting events like that, because they look really, really fun.
I guess it is just one of those things that when you do go to the USS, you already have so much influence and knowledge about what you're expecting, but it's also difficult to detach that from Hollywood and the glitz and glamour and just the overtopness that that can be. As for example, the most simple one, but also the most absolute classic, is just a yellow school bus. For so many foreigners, everyone just believed that it was just a Simpsons thing because all of the characters are yellow, or just a general thing that they just put in movies and it's just the movie bus, so then they're not real buses. But it isn't until you go there and you actually see these things driving around and go, hang on a second, am I in a Hollywood set? Do I need to get out of here, or what's going on? But no, they do drive around, and that's because they're trying to make it feel like a real suburb for all the USA viewers. But for all the foreigners, you just go, oh, that's a Hollywood bus, not a USA bus. And so similar to her, I'm sure that if I went to a USA school, I would just be blown away by, if nothing else, well, kind of just the money that is poured into the school system. You know, I've heard of just the coaches being paid the most out out of the entire staffing, which is just insane. You know, surely that's just a volunteer PE teacher just giving up their time because they want to give the kids a run. No, that is just a permanent position that is paid stupid amounts of money because it just brings in so much money. College football is just insane.
But I find it insane that like schools will actually hire personnel just to work as a coach for a sports team. I don't think that would ever happen here, and in Canada, or at least in Ontario, teachers just volunteer to be the coach of a sports team. So if no teacher volunteers for a specific sport, then there's just no sports team for that year.
Yes, she said it so much better than I did, but my goodness, that is exactly what happens in Australia as well. I mean, maybe not in the high-end private school sector, but come on, that is just how it should be, or not how it should be, but just generally how it is for so many people. So to hear that the USA just doesn't roll the same, I mean, I guess it's to no one's surprise, but geez, it is different.
Number 2 is that schools seem a lot more strict and disciplined in the US compared to Canada. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a Canadian thing or an American thing. I feel like this might just vary from region to region. At my high school, we don't have detentions at all. And I think if people get in trouble, the school takes more of like a counseling and talk it out type of approach compared to detention. Or if it's really bad, they'll just suspend the person. And after talking to some Americans about lunch, I had the longest lunch, so my lunch break is an hour and 15 minutes, and most of the other people I talked to had like 30-minute or 45-minute lunches, and a lot of them weren't allowed to leave school grounds either during lunch, and they were only allowed to stay in the cafeteria, whereas like we can go anywhere during lunch. There's a bunch of food places, there's a Walmart, and there's a mall near my school, so I've literally gone to the mall during lunch.
That would never happen in Australia. There is no way they let you out of your sight. If you are just on school grounds within school hours, you are on school grounds. You are not leaving. They're not taking that liability because you are over there, but you are just kind of in their care, and not happening. To the point where I have so many stories and examples of people getting in trouble for getting food delivered to school. They had nothing to eat, so they went, okay, I can't leave, so I'll get it delivered, and they still got in trouble for that. I certainly also have never heard of an hour and 15-minute lunch. That is pretty insane. The longest I think I've heard of is 50-ish minutes, but really an hour and 15 compared to some people only having 35. I mean, honestly, from both ends, I would love to know how much time off from class do they have every day, because, well, if some people are only getting 50 minutes and some people are getting 2 hours, as I feel as though for a lot of Australian schools, you're getting about an hour in total. Let's call it 15 minutes or 20 minutes and then 40 and 45 minutes as a lunch and recess kind of thing. But also, I feel as though I've heard before that USA schools, and I can only imagine the Canadian schools as well, because nothing has been mentioned, start so early. I feel as though I've heard 7 a.m., 7:30, 8 a.m. No, that is way too early. I mean, I do wonder, do they finish at the same time? Do they finish at 3? Or how long are schooling days? In the US, a typical day of high school starts around 7:30 a.m. and ends around 3. That is disgusting. How are you doing that to people? Canada school times, what's it going to be? Between 8:30 and 9. Okay, so it is different, and it is definitely more towards the Australian system as well. So I can only imagine the USA is just doing what the USA does, completely does it differently. I'm sure the UK, Australia, and Canada just all do 8:30 to 9 till about 3 p.m. Maybe, as it says here, till 4 p.m. if you're having some extracurricular activities or extra classes, being 4 units and extension classes after school or before school would be the only time you're coming in at anywhere near 7:30. No.
So number 3 for structure is that in Canada, school starts at the beginning of September and it ends at the end of June, whereas in the US, I think that school usually ends in like May. And then they start back up in August. And honestly, I prefer school starting in September and ending in May, because half the time in Canada in May, it's still cold. Like, tell me why 2 weeks ago in May, it snowed.
This is one that I have not and probably never will figure out. Why do your school years get split by an entire year? You don't want to be starting in 2013 and finishing in 2014, starting in 2024 and finishing in 2025. It doesn't make sense. You're going to have people over all the different age groups. You just go from the start of the year to the end of the year, and then you move on every single time. It's so much easier. And look, I understand that the seasons are inverted and people want to make the most of their summer break, and I'm fairly sure that North America gets about 1 billion months off in the middle of the year anyway, but it still just does not make sense to me. You know, you just have your big break during summer and then just go back to school in the same year because it's the same year. And if you are wondering what the glorious, perfect Australian school year looks like, it looks like starting at the end of January, going for 10 weeks, let's call it that, 2 weeks off, another 10 weeks, 2 weeks off, maybe 11 weeks, 2 weeks off, 9 weeks, and then depending on which school you go to, you're going to finish somewhere around December. That then carries you all the way back to the end of January. 6 full weeks, all of summer, all of Christmas, Christmas, all of New Year's, all of Australia Day, all of it.
So for number 4, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think in the US they offer AP classes at all schools, whereas in Canada they only offer it at schools that have the AP program. So there aren't that many schools where you can take AP classes. Number 5 is that in Canada
Wait, is that accelerated program? Honestly, I'm sure if you asked really nicely, if you went to some fancy school, they might have the resources to be able to facilitate that, but I've never heard of anyone doing that because they're just like, well, that's the year you're in the same year, just go do your year's courses, please.
Number 5 is that in Canada we don't have school nurses, and they seem to be in like every TV show, but yeah, we ain't got none. Number 6 is that I don't think many Canadian schools have like metal detectors and a lot of security when you enter the school. Number 7 is that in the US, I think French is offered, but people mostly take Spanish, whereas in Canada, since we have 2 official languages, English and French, we learn French in school from like grade 4 to grade 9, and then after grade 9 it becomes optional. And in Quebec, which is like the French speaking part of Canada, they take English. And lastly,
oh really? Wow, so it is backwards in that regard. I hadn't realized that it was fully backwards. I just would have thought that they run in tandem to one another, everyone learning the same stuff constantly at the same time. I mean, to be fair, this is definitely something that Australia is extremely lackluster on. Yes, you might learn the odd language, or more so the odd word, because the school kind of just picks a subject and you have to take it for a year or 2. And look, I do get it from the point of view of Australia doesn't have any land borders, and so there's no forced dialects in the same way that the USA and Canada do, but honestly, even New Zealand have 2 dialects, just being Maori and also English. And I've also always found it a bit weird, given our position on the globe, that we don't really teach any Asian languages, whether it be Mandarin, Japanese, Korean. As if nothing else, it feels a little bit weird to not be able to communicate with some of your biggest trading partners.
And for the last category, which is other, first is that in the US, basically everyone calls post-secondary school college, whereas in Canada, there is a very distinct difference between college and university. Number 2 is that people don't say freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior like in the US. We just say grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I don't think I've ever heard anyone say I'm a junior in high school or I'm a senior. Like, no. If someone asks you what grade you're in, you would just say, I'm in grade 10 or I'm in grade 11. Number 4.
How it should be, so then you just can't have your international micro colony of people just not knowing what's going on. Because yes, I understand that everyone in the USA knows what's going on, but it doesn't describe what year you were in. I've said it before, no one internationally can know what you're in, because freshman, yeah, sure, that's fresh, but what about sophomore? What about junior? Like, there are all these different names that just mean the same thing. And so I just have to applaud Canada for not following in the same stupid footsteps, because my goodness, even just saying grade or year 10 is so much faster than saying sophomore. It's such a long word to say year 10. Done.
Number 4 is that US high schools and the US in general just seem so much more patriotic than Canada. And I find it almost eerie that everyone pledges to the flag every morning in the US.
Yes.
Like, it's kind of creepy.
Yes.
In Canada, we just stand to the national anthem in the morning. Except for Quebec, they don't do that. I find it so weird that some US schools have military scouts like right in their high school. It's definitely not a thing in my region, but I don't think it's a thing anywhere else in Canada.
In the school? Like, in the school, as though you've got the football coach, you've got the swimming coach, and then you just got the military scout, just chilling together. What? I mean, I know the military budget is absolutely massive and they need a lot of personnel to be able to fill the seats, but come on, you're taking kids straight out of school. Like, surely that's the whole reason they're in school, is to try and keep them in school as well. And there's also so much pressure for them to go to college, and so which one is it?
And lastly, teachers are just paid better in Canada. I'm not sure how reliable this is, but I read somewhere that in like some southern states, teachers can make as little as $15,000 a year, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Like, here in Ontario, minimum wage is $14 an hour, and you can literally make more by working a full-time minimum wage job than being a teacher, if that piece of information is true. You could
How is that possible? 15,000 US, but 15,000 a year? That doesn't, like, what does that even add up to as an hourly wage? As if we go 15,000 divided by what, maybe 40 weeks in a year is a nice round even number? $375. How are you possibly meant to have any incentive to do anything, to lesson plan, to anything at all for $375, let alone just live? Like, it's nothing. It's what? It's less than $10 an hour for a 40-hour work week. I mean, to give a bit of a comparison, I don't believe I've ever heard of a full-time, fully qualified teacher earning less than 75,000 Australian, which is what, like $50,000 if you want to call it that US. And so to go from 15 to 50, that's absurdly different.
You can literally make more by working a full-time minimum wage job than being a
$8
teacher,
an hour.
if that piece of information is true. You could have a whole teaching degree and make 15K a year from your job. That's ridiculous.
But hey, I feel as though after watching this video, I'm certainly going to need some recovery time because there are so many things that have blown my mind going, hang on a second, what do you mean you start in the middle of the year and I guess you have summer there, but why are you doing that thing? And then, okay, sure, you just pay $1 billion a year to some coach, but then 15K to your teachers. Like, what's going on there? And I honestly find that quite surprising because generally speaking, between the USA and Canada, there are very nuanced differences. They are very similar countries in the grand scheme of things, but this I feel actually had some major differences between, well, a whole bundle of things, let alone when you jump over to Australia or maybe even all the way back to the UK, which feels as though Canada and Australia have definitely taken that on board because, well, there's a lot of similarities there, but like I said, the US just does the US things, goes out on a limb and just puts all their money and all their eggs in one basket, and I mean, I guess it works for them, but geez, it is just different and insane. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I am going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to do the YouTube algorithm things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you are watching, then make sure to go check out any other ones I've done. Also, make sure to go check out the original video down in the description below. Or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.